Binder changed the world for us. The bookbinder, through his acts of good deeds, which didn't cost him much, made sure the world would have electromagnetism. He told Michael, "You're binding all these books. Why don't you take some time and read them? Sit down and relax." He was not just a bookbinder, he was a bookseller too. So there were lots of books. In fact, Michael Faraday had more access to books than a lot of kids do today at school, right? Unless they get arrested and go to jail, then they're really good prison libraries. Okay. Actually, a friend of mine wrote an article about that and said, if you're a teenager and you're in poverty and you want to get access to books, rob a liquor store. Then you'll be sent to jail, and there are far more books in the prison libraries. Okay, political comment on school libraries. Anyway, he read the books, and as he read largely fiction. This is going to be important. He read the Arabian Nights, he read popular novels. Gradually over time, he discovered his interests, largely through reading and reading all the encyclopedias that were there. He then found himself apprenticed to a man named Davies, one of the top chemists in the world. Michael became his assistant. When Michael Faraday was 26, he published his first research paper. He spent the next 40 years doing research and publishing and changed the world of chemistry. Michael Faraday never studied. Michael Faraday never took a test. Got it? Yet he was the most prominent scientist of his time. Let's move on to other cases. Thomas Edison dropped out of school when he was 8 years old. He hated school. He was a bother. He was acting out in class. Teacher sent him home. His mom taught him how to read. She read to him largely. He got a job when he was around 11 or 12 on a train in which he'd sell newspapers on the train. There was a 5-hour layover. Guess what he did during the layover? He went to the local library, had access to books. Pretty good. He had 3 months of schooling, big head start for 1,000 patents, right? No, he did it through the reading. Okay, also, never took a test, never studied. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the official biographers say that he had schooling up to the 6th grade. Not true, because a year of school was like 2 months in those days. He really had about a year of school. And look what happened. We all know his reputation for being a voracious reader. Okay, these are cases of people, as you see, with very little or no schooling and did very, very well. Next category, people who are lousy students. And I can generalize this quite easily. George Orwell, Albert Einstein, and Isaac Newton. By the way, for Einstein and Newton, how many of you have ever looked at my stuff on Twitter and Facebook? Okay, then you know that I always quote Susan Ohanian all the time, okay, constantly. Her husband, Hans Ohanian, wrote a biography of Einstein called Einstein's Mistakes. It's brilliant. It's all about the scientific method, how you go back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. He loved Einstein. And he also talked about Isaac Newton as well. Both Einstein and Newton were their own scholars. They didn't do the required reading. Newton failed his examinations. They read what they wanted to read to pursue the problems that they were interested in. George Orwell's biographer said the same thing. His school teacher says, very undisciplined. He was a real problem at school. He never did the required reading. But on interview, he does a lot of reading. But he reads what he wants to read. Fascinating. Third group, a little mysterious, people who are great students and who are also successful despite being great students, all right? We have Robert Oppenheimer and Marie Curie, who were phenomenal. Madame Curie was one of the best students who ever went to the Sorbonne. Oppenheimer was a fabulous physics student and became one of the great physicists of the United States. The third person here is my buddy Larry Hyman. We were students together. I was 27, he was 21. He was doing his senior year of undergraduate and his first year of graduate school. He was one of these Wunderkinder, one of these proteges, and we all loved him. No one was jealous because he was very nice and so brilliant. He went on to become the chair of the department at Berkeley in the linguistics department and is one of the outstanding scholars in African languages and phonological theory in the world. How did he do so well? Combination of things. I suspect all three of these people had the freedom in school to follow their interests. In fact, maybe the curriculum coincided with their interests. These are research questions. It could have been they read so much they then took classes where they already knew the stuff, which is a good way of doing it. I'll tell you what Larry did. Our first year in graduate school in linguistics, we all took a course in field methods where we analyzed the structure of a language we've never seen before. Larry worked on an African language, took a class with it, and in the course of his work, he discovered a new phenomenon in phonological theory. Those of you, both of you who remember your linguistics class, he posited that you can have abstract structures in phonology that never appear on the surface, which was a violation of certain principles, but he convinced everyone, including, the top phonologists. He did it for his class. When we took our master's examinations, the question on phonology, he used that material. He took 2 classes in phonology and used that material in both classes. It became his first publication at age 22 in the major journal, can you imagine, and established his career as a phonologist. In other words, he followed his own path. He did narrow work, what he wanted to on his own, and it paid off for him. Well, we're going to make more sense of these people after I give you a little bit of background and theory. I think you've heard of free voluntary reading, right? Yeah, and all that stuff I've been nagging people about for the last 30 years, since the 80s. Well, I'll give you a brief summary. Brief summaries are kind of useless, but I'm going to do them anyway. If you already know it, you don't need it. And if you don't know it, it won't help. So here's the brief summary. Reading for pleasure is the source of most of our literacy. It's the source of our vocabulary, our grammar, our ability to handle complex grammatical constructions, our writing style, our spelling, all this stuff comes from free voluntary self-selected reading that you want on your own. I have hypothesized that we go through 3 stages in this. The first stage, TPRS, stories. Stories. Hearing stories when you're a little kid. Getting read to in school. The research on storytelling and read-alouds is fabulous. It gives you the prerequisites for everything else in reading. I want to tell you about my latest research, which none of you know about yet, because it's brand new. I just wrote the draft and shared it this morning. Remember language experience? How many of you remember this? Okay, not too many people. Language experience was popular in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Very simple. This is kind of like the mother of TPRS that nobody knows. Okay, it was done in first grade classes for native speakers of English. The child would dictate the story to the teacher. The teacher would write it out, and with computers, you make copies for everyone. That's the reading material. It fell out of favor, in my biased opinion, because nobody could make any money on it. Pearson cannot cash in on language experience. You can't do a textbook. All you need is pencil and paper. Today with a computer, it's wonderful. You can put it on the internet, share it with everybody. It's absolutely great. I found some studies done in the 60s, and I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to make sense of them. Just wrote up the table this week, etc. And it's hard. It's very sloppy research because it's combined with other methods. But there is something going on there. That was my conclusion. And we need to take a harder look at this. Comprehensible, compelling input, okay? The second stage, self-selected, narrow, recreational reading. Reading because you want to do the kind of reading you did as a middle school student, as a teenager, and that you do right now. Reading for fun, no book report, no questions at the end of the chapter. And as I've bored you with talk after talk and readings, there's a tremendous amount of research showing this is true, that self-selected reading is the way we go through this very important middle stage. This sets you up for the final stage, complicated reading in your specialty. I don't think that just reading novels and easy stuff is going to bring you to the highest level, but it makes it possible. It brings you to the threshold where specialized reading is more comprehensible. Notice I have not called this academic reading. I'm uncomfortable with the term academic reading, especially with the thrust of the government now through Common Core, which I think is a tsunami destroying education, that insists that we all go for academics. If you look at the Common Core English requirements, it looks like an English lit major. If you look at the math requirements, it's pre-engineering, all the way through. It's all this complicated stuff. Big major mistake, in my opinion. What we want to do, yes, if kids want to go to college, go right ahead. We want to make it possible. I'll have more to say about this later. But we also want to prepare students for any specialty they want. And it's not always college. People, as we'll see later, people have different geniuses. This will be the point of my talk. I will just give you a hint of it by quoting former Secretary John Gardner, I think in Clinton's cabinet, first Clinton, right? He said, if we praise mediocre philosophy and disdain competent plumbing, neither our theories nor our pipes will hold water. More on this later. So we're really talking about any kind of specialized language. Okay, that's the old stuff. Now, cognitive psychology. How do we get smart? How do we do cognitive development? Here's the entire secret, in my opinion. We get smart in only one way. Not by study. Smart people don't study. Linus Pauling, the world's greatest chemist, didn't get up in the morning and review the periodic table with the flashcards. We get smart by wrestling with problems that we find interesting. It's the only path. Now I'm going to say 4 things about it. I'm going to describe the path, the pleasure of the path, it's right there in the handout, why it is the gateway to long-term memory. I'm going to tell you how to do it, how to solve problems. This is not my idea. This is stuff I have learned by reading. Okay? The path. Great quote, Picasso, the meaning of life is find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. Did you see a movie called The Equalizer with Denzel? Probably one of the most violent movies I've ever seen. I loved it. Only Denzel could have played this role. Nobody else in the world, if you saw the movie. It began with a quote by Mark Twain. It said, the 2 most important days of your life, the day you're born, the day you discover why. Isn't that amazing? Jewish philosophy, and this is, I think, in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, it says, it's a proper livelihood. If you want to get a job that's right, find something that you like, that you're good at, and that helps people. Same idea. Exactly what Picasso says. Now I'm going to boil this down into 3 steps. The first step, find out what you're good at and what you like. Find your gift, as Picasso says. I'm going to say later, school should be helping kids do this. Number 2, develop your gift. Number 3, give it away. It's different for every one of us. We are all different, Common Core. Get it? We're different. If we were all the same, the human race wouldn't survive. We need diversity. Great joke by Gary Muledeer, great comedian. He says, my grandpa told me we're all different. We all want different things. If everybody wanted the same thing, everybody would be after your grandma. Well, here's some quotes. This guy Roger Rosenblatt wrote this article that really, I'm telling you the results of my personal therapy. That's what this talk is. Rosenblatt wrote this book called wrote this article called Don't Go to Your Left. High school basketball players are told, learn to dribble with your right hand, learn to dribble with your left, learn to shoot with your right, learn your left. Bad advice. If you're always working on your weak spots, you never get good at anything. That's what school wants us to do all the time. Find what you do well. Here we go. Beethoven. The following quote is from Beethoven. Beethoven can write music, thank God, but he can do nothing else on earth. Beethoven would never got through the 4th grade Common Core exams. Einstein, this is attributed to Einstein. Everyone's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life believing that it's stupid. Stupid and incompetent means you have not found your path. That's the new definition. Well, Now the pleasure. I do recommend a wonderful book called The Ultimate Seduction. The author is here, his last name is Chandler, I forgot her first name. It's from a quote from Picasso. Work is the ultimate seduction. When you find your path, you love doing it. Nothing can keep you away from it. That's why I like these conferences. Everybody here has found their path. They have found their gift, and they're getting what they need to develop it. Isn't this true? We yes, it's true. Okay. The path, the book of Ultimate Seduction, Chandler interviewed all these famous people like Truman Capote. And my favorite was Mae West. How many of you remember Mae West? Okay. She was the kind of bawdy show business lady of the 20s and 30s. Why don't you come up and see me sometime, big boy? Am I being recorded? Good. Because her famous joke was, is that a gun in your pocket, or are you just glad to see me? Right? Remember that one? Well, she was interviewed, and she said this amazing thing about her show business act. She said, my other show business people come up to me and say, how can you keep coming up with these new things? You're making the rest of us look bad. Why don't you calm down? She says, wait a minute, I'm not even thinking about you when I'm doing my act. I love my work. This is fun. Don't stop me from having fun. Profound insight. Well, the pleasure continues. Vonnegut says it just right. It's not harrowing challenges, but rather tasks we find natural and interesting. Tasks we were apparently born to perform. Long talks with my buddy Larry. He's going to be getting off the plane in Paris when I'm getting on the plane to go home from Agen. I've seen him about 3 years now. I told him I've included him in the paper, but he doesn't know why. When we would do work and talk about our work as grad students, he would look at my stuff and say, how do you do that? And I would look at his stuff and say, how do you do that? It seems so easy when you found your path, and someone else's path is not so easy. So you know which way you have to go. Anders Eckerson, really great studies of time on task. Smart people work very hard, in a sense. They put in a lot of time. They don't consider it to be work, though. They put in more time than, say, average performers in their field. Cumulatively over time, it's a huge amount, but they love it. Csikszentmihalyi Mahali has quotes from Galileo, Michelson, Crick, Picasso. I'll talk about each. Galileo said, my work is so much fun. Michelson, Nobel Prize winner in physics. Why do you keep measuring the speed of light? Because it's fun, the same word. Crick, enjoyment is the major factor in accomplishment. And as we see, the same thing with Picasso. Okay, we have determined the path that people do it. We have determined that it's pleasant. And now the big task. I have to show you that it works. That study doesn't count. That problem solving is the way. I'm going to divide the evidence into two groups. Informal observations and the formal research. And I think you will agree that the informal observations, the anecdotes, are far more powerful than the formal research. Cognitive psychology is way behind on this. Noam Chomsky. I've read his little books on politics, and they're really interesting. One of them he talks about, he's a big fan of the average person's great knowledge and creativity that society does not respect. He says, Noam Chomsky says, I was driving and listening to talk radio. I can't imagine Noam Chomsky driving and listening to talk radio for some reason, but there he is. And he's listening to a sports show, call-up sports show. And these people call up with the most arcane and deep knowledge of sports. They know all about runs batted in, home runs, the infield fly rule, you know, who the big, what the next trade is going to be, who they're going to start as a starting pitcher in the playoffs. And he says this, and I've noticed this. I have never been in a stupid sports argument. The people who argue sports with you, oh, they shouldn't have done the hit and run, they should have punted on third down and all that stuff. They always have a reason, and it's well thought out. Chomsky says the average sports fan has encyclopedic knowledge of facts without studying and highly competent critical thinking. When I was 11 years old, I or any of my friends could have managed the Chicago Cubs for a week. Nobody would have known the difference. True or not true? You could have done, Audie could have done it too. Chomsky's rap is now the political part. I'll get off on a tangent here. He says, they keep telling us, no, this is, don't worry about politics, it's too complicated. Okay. Donald Trump doesn't read anything, he admitted that today. No, I just use my common sense. Oh boy. And they say, the other ones say that this is too complicated, let us handle it. And Chomsky says sports is far more complicated than politics. In fact, 10 years from now, we'll be looking at, say, what has happened this week in the world, and it'll be in high school textbooks. And it'll be, you won't have the deep gossip behind it, but you'll have a pretty good idea of what's going on. Okay? So what we do is we take the great intelligence of the so-called average person, channel it into something they cannot control. That's the point. And we leave the big decisions to the people who are manipulating it for their own financial profit. Okay, more interesting things. Donald Miller, you know her? Oh yes, the book whisperer. I admire her on many, many levels. I think she's wonderful. I was at a conference, I think it was NCT, and Donald gave a discussion with middle school teachers that I went to. And there were about 100 teachers in the room. She said this, how many of you have someone in your class who's an expert on World War II? 8 teachers raised their hands. How many of you have an expert in your class who knows everything about fish? 12 kids raised their hands. Kids find their interests. They read deeply about them, they study them, they know the facts without studying, without taking a test, etc. And it's different. Not everyone's interested in World War II, and their interests change over time. Okay, Frank Smith has pointed out that the so-called laws of learning, how many repetitions, are based on studies of using nonsense words. When you put meaning into the equation, all that disappears. One repetition is enough if the fact is salient enough and it solves a problem for you. I'd like to recite some romantic poetry for you. Do you love me or do you not? You told me once, but I forgot. The reason that's nonsense is that you don't forget things like that. One trial, what did you say? Did you love me? I don't know, was it yes or no? The phone rings and your cousin calls and says, I've just won the lottery, we got a ticket together, we're gonna split $1 million. You don't then hang up the phone and say, who was that? How much was it? You know, one trial is enough if it solves a problem. Successful graduate students were studied by, of all people, Benjamin Bloom. Remember his hierarchy and all that? The best graduate students, the ones who went on to have real careers and make contributions, were not the ones who would come in for advisory and say, well, what is my next required class? How do I get through the next examination? They didn't even think about that. They took the side of the faculty. They joined forces in the faculty with problem solving because they were interested. That's what happened to me. I had open-minded, interesting faculty, and we all worked kind of as a team, you know, the way we do in TPRS, where there's very little hierarchy. People are just exchanging ideas, etc. Well, this is I used to include my shopping mall. I don't go there anymore. The shopping mall was fascinating because I had encyclopedic knowledge of the shopping mall. I knew where the bathrooms were. And in those days, they were telephones. I knew where those were. And I remember there were 2 pizza places I used to go to with my kids. One place, when you order pizza, you get your drink at the same place. The other pizza place, you're supposed to know that you get the glass at the bar where you get your salad. And if you don't know that, you are subject to mild humiliation. Isn't this true? They expect you to know this stuff. And you do one trial learning. You just go there, then you know where the stores are. What they don't do in the shopping mall is have you study a sheet, you take a test, you get 80% or better, then you can shop. It's done through problem solving. The academic research is nowhere near as impressive. This is a series of studies done by a small group of researchers at the University of Minnesota. And They are studies in people remembering words. You give someone a list of words and you ask them to do several tasks. For example, in the first studies, they had them simply count the number of letters. The second group, they had them look for the letter E. It's called E-search. The third group, rate the word for pleasantness. The pleasantness group always did the best. They were just as good as the group who studied the words and tried to remember them. So in this case, incidental is the same as intentional. Bransford added another condition. The list of words was all objects. What would you do with this object if you were on a desert island? The group that did that did better than the intentional group. It's easy to break the intentional learning barrier. It doesn't have, the desert island condition is not very interesting. We went out last night for a walk, and I walked back with Linda and Ben, okay? And let me tell you what I did not do, what I didn't ask them. I'd say, hey Ben, haven't seen you in a while. Let's play the desert island game. I'll give you a list of words, and you tell me what you would do in those islands. What is with you? You know, is this the best thing you can do? I haven't seen you in 2 years, you know, come on. So it's nearly everything we do is more interesting than the desert island condition. It's ridiculously easy to break the conscious learning barrier, and yet we still stick to basic learning, basic conscious learning. Okay, now I'm going to give you the method. How do you solve problems? How do you solve people? This research I first read about in a book published in 1926. I got the first copy when it was first published, of course. Went to a family funeral. Bad joke coming up. The funeral director looked at me and said, "Don't even bother going home." Told my grandson, when I was a little boy, we lived in the country. I said, "Grandpa, when you were a little boy, everybody lived in the country." Those are my old people jokes. Okay. This is from Graham Wallace's manuscript in 1926, and he really got this idea from Helmholtz, the physicist, who said, when I'm stuck, I go for a walk and just think about nothing, and the ideas flow. They just come. This is the model. It has 3 stages: preparation, incubation, illumination. Preparation means you struggle and try to solve the problem you're working on. You know, I've got, unusual data. I'm trying to make sense of it. Trying to think of a story as we all, sit in the hotel rooms and we're going to do tomorrow in class. How are we going to handle this? That's wrestling with the problem. Then you stop and do something nearly mindless. That gives the subconscious mind a chance to solve the problem. Eckhart Tolle, remember in his book, The Power of Now, said scientists and philosophers know solutions to problems comes from your deep subconscious, from an inner stillness. Poincaré, famous French mathematician, lived 100 years ago. When I'm stuck in my work, I get up, put some, wood on the fire, etc., come back, and it's kind of easier, etc. Einstein took breaks. Csikszentmihalyi has studies in which he shows that scientists trying to solve problems schedule breaks. And during the breaks, you don't do anything important. Okay, you do something mindless. Have you guys heard me talk about writing? Oh, good, I can use this. Pretend you haven't heard it. I want to tell you what I do in hotel rooms. The Secret Life of Steve Krashen. When I go into a hotel room, the first thing that happens is that a poltergeist takes over my spirit. And I don't know, the next 10 minutes, I have no idea what happened, but I look around and all my stuff is spread out all over the room. Does this happen here? My underwear is in the bathroom. My toothpaste is on top of the TV. I have no idea how they get it. And I got to start cleaning up because the person's going to come in and clean up the room, and I don't want it to look really terrible. You do that too? Doesn't clean up before the cleaning person comes in. And there's nothing more boring than unpacking. So what I do is start my work. And just like Poincaré, I run into a block. I stop. Put away the toothpaste. Put it in the bag. That's all I do. Then I sit down and work again. Another writer's block, another problem I can't solve. Happens constantly. My life is one writer's block after another. That's all it is. Put away that shirt. By the end of the evening, I've done all the work I want to do, and the room is reasonably clean. I have the same policy in washing dishes. I like to wash dishes only. I can take a 20-minute dishwashing job and get it done in 2.5 hours. Because I come in with my work. This is taking advantage of incubation. Then illumination, the idea comes out, write it down. If you don't write it down, you're going to lose it. Graham Wallace says the story of the man who had such a brilliant idea, he sank to his knees to thank God and found in getting up that he had completely forgotten what the idea was. Okay, so you got to write it down. Okay, those are the stages. We're going on to the other. Let's talk about how smart people read, how smart people write, and what should go on in school. First of all, smart people read a lot. This is Dean Keith Simonton's work on creativity. Omnivorous reading is a universal among eminent people who accomplish things. They read a lot. It is through reading that helps them discover their talents, their gifts, their interests. They don't know that as they're reading. They say, well, I'm going to read this novel to help me figure out what to do with my messed up life. No, if you read a novel, and then if you enjoy it, that means you're learning something. Something is happening. The research confirms this. Keith Stanovich's work. People who read more know more about everything. They know more about literature, they know more about history, they know more about science, they know more about practical matters. Most of what people read is fiction. Got that, Common Core? It's fiction that people read. Smart people read what they want to read, not what other people tell them to read. We found this is true with Einstein, with Newton, and George Orwell. Do you like getting books as gifts? I don't. Vonnegut talks about this. He says, I have these books on my shelf. You know, I was an English lit major, so people give me all these English lit stuff, Jane Austen, everything. And it's on the shelf, and they're looking down, staring at me, making me feel guilty. I never want to, don't give me a book. Give me a Starbucks card, that's good. Thanks, Karen. Okay. Don't give me a book because it's not what I want to read. Isn't that true? You want to read what you want to read at that time, okay? Smart people do this. They read what they, in academic reading, they read what they want to read to solve the problem they're working on now. A guy named Bas Prasserman did a study, he was a physicist. It's about 30 years ago when people went to libraries. And he found that top physicists went to the library regularly, about once a week, checked the physics journals. They only made copies and read the articles relevant to their work right now. The rest they would put away. I'll look at it later when I'm working on that problem. Now, let me tell you, I feel guilty. A new journal comes. I get the journal, I look at it, and I feel the voice of my 4th grade teacher behind me. And she's saying, Stephen, read every article, it might be on the test. And when I give in to this temptation, it never works. I never remember anything that's in the article. I've had this experience of picking up a journal from my shelf, and it's maybe a year old, and it has my underlining, my notes in the margin, and I have no memory whatsoever of having read the paper. On the other hand, stuff I've read 30 years ago, I can tell you the data, I can tell you what page it's on, because it helped me solve a problem. True or not true? Absolutely true. Fiction. Most of what people read is fiction. If you look at library checkouts, something like 2/3 of public library checkouts are fiction. Isn't that amazing? I looked at bestseller lists of the New York Times for mostly fiction, and if you look at the stuff with kids, teenagers, young readers, it's all fiction. It's all, something's going on there. Now, why fiction? We've got more and more knowledge of what's going on in fiction. First of all, 2 studies have recently come out. One showed that people who read more fiction have a better ability to empathize. This makes sense. You're in someone else's life, you see it from their point of view. And a greater tolerance for vagueness. The world is not so simple. And here, very recently, is President Obama, quoted in a British newspaper. He says, fiction helps my understanding that the world is complicated and full of grays. that it's possible to connect with someone else, even though they're very different from you. Smart people read a lot. They read fiction. They select it themselves. How do smart people write? Smart people understand that writing is one of the best methods of making yourself smarter and solving problems. When people talk about writing, it's usually divided into two aspects, which I think is correct. There's writing form, being able to write an acceptable essay with all the paragraphs in the right place, all this. And then there's writing that makes you smarter. That's called the composing process, coming up with new ideas. Writing form comes from reading. There's no reason to test writing form, because it comes from reading. Reading and writing tests always correlate very highly. The real reason we do writing in school is so kids can use it to solve problems and make themselves smarter, which you can't test. I have just recommended that we no longer test writing ever in public schools. It's the hardest thing to test, and it's a total waste of time. I'm not talking about fluency, which we use as a quick test of fluency. As long as we don't take them too seriously and practice it, it's a reasonable way of seeing where the kids are. But having kids write essays and have the essays assigned a grade is the most expensive thing to do, the most frustrating thing to do. The grading is the least reliable. We can save society several $1 billion a year by throwing out the writing tests in many ways. May I have some applause for that? What good writers know, and this is heavy, and this has helped me fabulously. Good writers know that new ideas are the result of writing. You don't just walk around and have a great idea and write it down. Sit down and start to write. Stephen King says this. Don't wait for the muse, the creative spirit. Your job is to make sure the muse knows that where you're going to be every day from 9 till noon, 7 till 3. Sit down with no idea. Susan Sontag, any productive writer learns you can't wait for inspiration. That's the recipe for writer's block. I want to tell you about my other career. It's related to the piano and music. Living in California, it is a California law now that if you're a citizen of the state, you must be involved in show business. Which I am. My showbiz career is now 10 years old. I've been writing musicals, and they've been performed. Yeah, I'm telling you. All right. You'll be even more impressed when I give you the details, especially with this one. The last one, there were more people in the audience than on the stage. I do a musical every year for the synagogue. The holiday is Purim. It's the Book of Esther. And in liberal synagogues, you do what's called a Purim spiel. You take the Book of Esther, you link it to a movie, and you change the words around like Weird Al Yankovic. Last year, the year before last was Frozen. We had such a good time. In Judaism, the minimum number of people for certain prayers is 10, and it's called a minyan. So the song was, would you like to join our minyan? Would you like to come and pray? So it's hilarious. And I'm supposed to come out with this play every year. And I always procrastinate. I have no ideas. I don't know what we're going to do next year. I have no idea. But when it gets time for the holidays, which should be coming up in a couple of months, the Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, all this, and we get together, I'm in the choir, and the choir is the cast. Okay? So I said, what are we going to do? And then I remember what Stephen King said and what Susan Sontag said. Sit down, start to write with no ideas. You're going to begin with Queen Vashti and King Ahasuerus. It's always the start. So that's easy. What songs might go with this? What musicals might? And the first day I make it, and I decide I'm only going to work for 5 minutes a day. That's all. Within 3 weeks, I have a draft. Sit down, start to write. The muse will come. And you got to do it every day, otherwise you lose your grip. And if you do it every day, the subconscious mind is playing with it. And realize, I will quote Ernest Hemingway. I was looking at this. This is a quote. This is not me talking, but it's a very helpful quote. The first draft of anything is shit. Once you know that, writer's block disappears. It doesn't have to be good. Just start writing, because you can change it. So these are things called the composing process, which are things you know about, which are very good, which are ways of helping writers discover new ideas and avoid writer's blocks. Okay? Getting to the end of this, do we need school? Well, a lot of people have done pretty well without it. If you look at the unschooling movement, there's a journal of unschooling. Take a look. It's not homeschooling. It's unschooling. Okay? They play all these games on the computer and mess around, and oh boy, they get a lot done. It's fascinating. I think school can do things. When it does work, it works for one of several reasons. We've had people where it works, as you've seen. It works because the school gave you an area where you could explore your interests. Happened to my son, who's now a mathematician. He got great help from the professors, from his high school teachers. When he comes back to the home, he drops by the high school and hangs out with his physics teacher, because they continue to have great conversations, 20, 25 years later, et cetera. It gave him the space and helped him follow up his interests, et cetera. School is the place where we should expose students to a lot of different things. Help them get excited about something. Since it's going to happen through reading, as well as other ways, the library comes first, all the time. And yet, libraries are being defunded as fast as possible. People say, we have needs in our society. We can't just go with whatever kids like. This kind of, sloppy, liberal, tree-hugging, granola-eating stuff, come on. Because our country has problems. We need to catch up to China in science, technology, engineering, and math. You gotta read Jung Zhao, Z-H-A-O. Jung Zhao is amazing. Professor at Oregon. He wrote this book about the Chinese and American education. And I'll be citing him quite a few other places. And he says China is now getting a little embarrassed with the high test scores, especially Shanghai, where all the high test scores are, because it doesn't correlate with entrepreneurship and creativity. We don't want just people who study for exams. We want Steve Jobs. We want these people to go out and create things. The United States was held up as their model of creative education, but now the United States is going test crazy. It's been like this. Jung Zhao says the United States is going where China used to be, China's going where the United States used to be. Doesn't make sense, but this is what we're doing. Well, let's say we have this need, science, technology, engineering, and math, and these other countries are leaving us behind and all that stuff. 2 points. Number one, it is not true. The technology shortage is a hoax. H-O-X. If you look at any research on science, technology, engineering, and math, any research, and this research has been going on for years, you will see that we are oversupplied with engineers. Hal Salzman from Rutgers has published paper after paper on this. He's found there are 3 qualified engineers for every job in engineering. You want to know where they are? They're in Starbucks on their computers looking for jobs online. That's where they are, okay? Computer science, there's no shortage of programmers at all. Exactly the same amount. We don't need any more. Some areas of software, yeah, there's a shortage. But we're not talking about millions of people, not even close. The shortages are larger in plumbing, electrical workers, home care, elementary school teachers. And these are jobs that are not jobs with the gig economy. These are full-time jobs that have benefits and a solid salary. And the computer stuff, they're gonna hire you for a project and then you're out. It's good. At best, it's gonna be like Walmart's. At worst, it's gonna be like driving Uber. And this is where things are going. And more tragically, we have many young people where that's where their genius is. That's what they want to do. They want to be carpenters, electricians, plumbers, nurses, etc., all these other things, where there are genuine shortages and genuine needs. But let's say it is true. Let's say there are shortages and we really need a lot of engineers, mathematicians right away. How do we do it? The way to do it is don't worry about it. Let kids follow their bliss. This is Jung Zhao again. First of all, nothing else is going to work. If you don't let someone follow their talent, they're going to be miserable. And if you do, you don't know what the future's going to be. Today's shortage might be gone in 5 years. I will quote the great American philosopher Yogi Berra, who said, "It's impossible to predict, especially about the future." I've been looking at science fiction, which I really like, and people are always excited when science fiction actually comes up with something that turns out to be. It's very rare. It nearly never happens. In technology, we're supposed to be going faster than the speed of light, going through the alpha quadrant, beta quadrant, and all this, and going, should have colonized the moon 50 years ago. No, the predictions were absolutely wrong. It's going off in directions nobody knows. The people in charge think they know what we're going to need 10, 15 years from now. A fifth grader today, when that fifth grader is out in the job market, the world's going to be very different. Jung Zhao says, forget it. Find what you're good at. Because we're so interconnected on the internet, the world will find a place for your talent. Isn't that beautiful? Get good at anything you like. You may find yourself working for a company in Argentina and you have no idea. Someone is going to need what you're good at. It's not a decision that we should argue about. It's really, and I think, absolutely the only choice we can possibly make. We have no idea. And these people who say they know what's going to happen do not know. All predictions about the future, in my opinion, have been just about completely incorrect. Well, what about the basics? Here's another issue. How do we make sure kids get the basics if they just want to do what they want? Jung Zhao, in his latest book, has a brilliant hypothesis. I'm not saying it's true, but I think the hypothesis is incredibly intelligent, and we need to see if it's true. He says it may be the case that if you follow your own interests, you'll get the basics. You will run after the basics. You will need them. We may not have to worry about it at all. Again, this is a hypothesis, but it's one that has never been tested, and if it's true, it saves us a lot of grief. I'm going to talk about Bryce. I got interested in this last week, and I wrote Bryce. I'm going to talk about it. You have no choice. Okay? And I asked him, as you know, Bryce is one of the great living masters of personalization. True? Of course. Thank you, Bryce. And, I wrote him a note last week. And I said, when you do this personalization stuff, like he'll come in the first day class and beginning Spanish. This is just wonderful. There'll be a student of the day, and he'll interview the student. Oh, how are you, Susie? Fine. It's all this is beginning Spanish. Do you have any pets? Okay. Oh, yeah. Guinea pig and a dog. What do you feed the pets? Does your mom like the pets? What does your mom say about the pets? You have any siblings? Your brother? How's your brother doing? All this. What does he think of the pets? What's your favorite sport? The first quiz is about Susie. How am I doing, Bryce? Okay? Getting it?
So far,
Okay.
so good.
The first quiz is about Susie. How many pets does she have? What does her mother think? This is the test in Spanish. This is brilliant. I asked Bryce, do they remember this stuff? Yes. They remember it better than they remember the academics. Sabrina told me the same thing the other night. Linda did a story the other day in class. I could tell from the reaction, everybody knew every detail, remember? There was a little joke that came up from the previous story. They remember all this stuff because it's compelling, comprehensible, and it's personal, and it's related to them. Personalization drenches everything I've been talking about because you've got to find your own path and your own interests. All right, come to some conclusions here. How to get rich through real estate. No, that's tomorrow's lesson.